Well, pull up a chair and set a spell here at Tales from SYL Ranch Alive, the vlogcast that reminds you to always know where your towel is. And I'm your host, Bill Stone. Well, happy Boxing Day to my Canadian friends and to everyone else. I hope you had a good Christmas or whatever you're celebrating. I say Christmas because I am not politically correct. Hey, Captain Jesse, Merry Christmas to you as well. So, to explain my show for viewers who may not come in at the top of the hour and give a little chance to get into the review, or people who are just watching in the archives, I do live reviews. Sometimes I do serious film and TV, sometimes I do schlock, and sometimes I do something with a broad appeal, like Star Wars movies, Marvel movies, The Orville, and Doctor Who. Usually, however, I stick to a period from about 1900 to 1980, and that's because the period after 1980 is pretty well documented. We've got a lot of great science fiction and a lot of technology that allows us to document it, but the stuff that comes before 1980 is not very well documented, and so part of the reason I do the show is to document it. I will take any and all questions, comments, and nasty remarks. I'll respond to as many of my viewers as possible. You can tell me if I missed something, if I'm completely full of crap, or if I just happen to be an amazingly hoopy frood, which is probably more likely. I do go into more depth than most reviewers. I don't just talk about whether I liked a film or not. I generally go into the acting, the direction, the cinematography, some of the mechanics of making a film. And I can do this because a long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, I was once an actor. So I can speak with a modicum of authority. Not as much authority as a modern working actor. I never want to give that impression. But with some authority. As they often say, those who can do, and those who can't teach. And I think my reviews are probably a little like teaching. Now, I often say that you really can't watch a movie this age, because it's 40 years old, without getting into some context. Because you really can't watch it as a 2018 viewer. Otherwise, it's going to look weird and crappy and strange. So, as always, when I approach these things, and doing it like a lot of my reviews, where I am talking about older films, I like to give context of the time period, because a lot has changed since 1978. And if you don't know this historical context, you really can't judge the movie properly. And in this case, there's quite a ton of context. The film has a lot of satire in it that was totally specific to the time period and is completely lost on modern viewers. Hey, Larry, that's right, respect my authority. In this film, with some things that date, I usually say the special effects date, and they always do, but what little special effects in here don't date because they're intentionally bad. This thing is in part a satire of 1950s B movies, so the bad special effects are intentional. There is one kind of special effect that I'll talk about that was totally unintentional, but I'll get into that in a minute. And the sociology, that always dates. You have to forgive some of the sociology and the clothes and all that. And this one, as I say, the sociology dates very badly because what satire of the time is in there is really lost on modern viewers. Yep, made in 1977, or at least January 1st, 1978. That's why it's getting my 40th here. But yeah, that's when it was made. And always remember about sociology, everything that you think is sociologically normal today, pop culture references, the clothes you wear, are all going to look stupid in 40 years. And people like you who are old will be the only ones who appreciate that stuff because you remember pop culture at the time. But your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, they're going to be mystified and probably sneering at it. And it doesn't take long to have the sociology date. And here I would point you off to something called the Pop Crunch Show, which at the time was hosted by one of my favorite non-Hollywood actresses, Sarah East. She's gone on to join SAG without any connection to Hollywood. I've got a link down at the bottom of my description to her IMDb if you're interested. I also have a URL for the show that she did, the Pop Crunch Show, which is on Daily Motion now. It's the only place that survives. It's not on YouTube anymore. And I have a link for the show down below. In fact, I have one particular video that you can watch called Jamie Spears, Camp Rock and the Return of Pop Crunch. Also have a link to down below. And if you're old enough, you can remember all the cultural references, but you may discover that a lot of it is really dated because it was very specific to the time. Larry says, Jimmy Carter was president. Yep, he sure was. Jimmy Carter was the president. So, putting context into this thing, my problem is that I do like to document context, but if I do it for every single episode, so that you can approach this as a film or TV show as a viewer of that time. The problem with setting the context is I generally do reviews on 10th anniversaries, like 10th, 20th, 30th, 40th, and all the way back to 100th, which we'll see next month. While setting that context is informative, it's also rather repetitive. And I end up repeating myself a lot, and my regular viewers can get bored as hell. So my solution is that since I do these on anniversaries, for every year that I do one that's new, I will do a context for that. I will set the context for it. But I will then pull them out as clips and put them aside. And you can take a look at the bottom of my channel page. There's a couple of playlists, one of which is for Fandom of the Era, the other one of which is for Life of the Era. So when I do that, I'll do it once. And in this particular case, 1978, I already covered this pretty well in my review of the Star Wars Holiday Special, which I suggest you take a look at. And the links for both Fandom and Life are in the bottom of my description. And you can go and watch that stuff. And I urge you, do watch those links because you can get a very good idea. I think it's very informative of the context. Now, this film, oh man. All right, a general non-spoiler review. This is a stupid, fun little film. It looks like it was shot on the cheap, and it was. It is totally self-aware and on purpose. It's not really crap. It was totally self-aware. And it is a funny movie. Again, intentionally satirizing those 1950s B-movies and having a lot of satire on context of the time that's really lost to history. But then that's where I come in. I am the Fandi master. So, expensive home movie. Yeah, kind of. Well, they did the original thing. I'll talk about that in a bit. They did the original. They did do testing of this in 8mm. So, yeah, I mean, it's just a bunch. I think it's just a bunch of people who got together, said, let's make a stupid movie. And they didn't have much of a budget. I'll talk about that. Higher than you think, but not very much. Again, kind of an expensive home movie, as Larry says. So for quite a while, I was trying to figure out what the hell am I going to say about this film, right? Do I talk about the actors? Well, really? There's not much point. Almost all of the actors were one-timers. This is the only thing that they did. There's a couple that aren't, but they're basically one-timers, and they're intentionally satirizing the bad acting of these B movies. And so some of them who aren't the greatest actors in the world, well, they never did anything else. They just came out for this stupid film. They got a tank, which impressed me. Yeah, there's something else, too, that they've got in here that's kind of a blooper that stayed in the movie. I'll talk about that. I was surprised when I found out about it. So do I talk about the cinematography and the direction? Well, this is a parody of 1950s B-movies that is intentionally self-aware. Both of those things are kind of blasé, predictable, and occasionally boring, but it is on purpose. Do I talk about the special effects? Well, again, this is intentionally bad. So the special effects being a satire of B-movies, they're bad. You know, what do you talk about? Do I talk about the people involved? Well, there's little to talk about. The film does have a legacy, and I can talk about that. And some of the people who got involved with this thing and why. Well, not why, I really don't know. Just for fun, I assume. Well, I can talk about some production anecdotes. As I say, there is one that's kind of funny. If you know the context for it, I'll talk about it. But like I say, about 90% of the film is satire on 1978 pop culture. I can't go through that. You know, if I go through and explain all of that, if you have to explain a joke, it's not funny anymore. So a lot of this humor is just going to be lost to time. I can't document that very well. I could spend the next 2 hours talking about the humor, but it would probably be very boring. As an example of this, right, the cultural stuff. Yeah, IMDb has no photos of the cast. Yeah, well, mostly one-timers. There's like one guy in here who's a professional actor. He was a guy who was on the Bob Newhart show a lot. He's really the only one that's not just a one-time thing for this. So, yeah. One thing I can talk about, just as an example of what this is satirizing that is kind of lost to history because it is pop culture. When they go to that advertising place and they're talking about the Stop Tomato program, right, and it's STP, Well, this is a satire of two things. One of them which was a whip inflation now propaganda program put out by the government with the acronym WIN, whip inflation now, and everybody thought it was stupid at the time. And it's also satirizing the STP Motor Oil Company. Because for some reason, stickers of STP were really, really popular back then. You'd see them on cars, you'd see them lots of places. I don't know why either, other than they probably had a good marketing team. Mr. Carlin and Jack Riley from the Bob Newhart Show. Yep, that's the one guy I think that's actually a professional. Yeah, and blink and you'll miss him. So that's the sort of thing that this stuff is satirizing. STP is satirizing something that made sense in the context of its time, but now, and again, if I have to sit here and explain all of that, when you explain a joke, it's not funny anymore. So I guess what I'm going to do is talk about some of the production aspects, some of the influence that this has had, and where it stands today, because believe it or not, it's in development hell right now. So that said, I guess I'll issue myself a...
Spoiler alert! Spoiler alert! All hands, prepare for incoming spoilers.
Yes, it is a spoiler alert, and that is because I am the Fandi master, and that means that the fandom is strong with me, and that means that nothing is new, nothing is original, and at worst I figure it out about a half an hour too early. This is not a boast, this is not a brag, this is sadly where you find yourself after having watched, read, and listened to about 100 years worth of science fiction. You just can't see the new stuff for the century that came before, and you discover there just isn't that much that's new in the world. And often it will interfere with your ability to enjoy things. But not so much with this thing. I did originally see this as a Padawan, and I knew much of what it was satirizing, both in pop culture and in B-movies. It's a little hard to get too much spoiled for you as long as you go into it with the knowledge that this is intentionally looking and acting like a bad movie. And there's a lot of humor in it that still will hold up. Tomato background. Yes, that's right. And we have tomato emojis. I didn't know that until today, actually. So, in terms of the plot, I'm not going to bother. If you've seen this movie, the plot itself is relatively simple. It's the humor that goes on throughout that makes the movie. And if you weren't alive in the 1970s, well, you're going to miss about 90% of the satire. And again, I can't go through and explain all of that. You explain a joke, it's not funny anymore, and it would probably be boring. Just be me talking about, okay, this is what they're satirizing. That really, it'd be boring. The musical numbers are odd, Larry says. Yeah. There's that one big giant one at the end that's all dubbed. That's really strange. And one musical piece that is, in fact, key to the plot of this film. I can tell you the general plot. All the tomatoes in the world become alive, and they start going crazy and killing everyone. However, the key to stopping them is playing a really terrible song called Puberty Love, and then the tomatoes go back to being docile again. And scene. The rest of it is all just satire. So one thing we can ask ourselves is, whose bright idea was this film? It really was the brainchild and the baby of three people, one of whom is Costa Dillon. Now, he's billed here as the writer, costume designer, production manager, location manager, second unit and assistant director, the art department, and miscellaneous bit parts. He has one bit part, I think, in this. As often happens when you get small, low-budget films like this that, like Larry says, are almost like, 8mm movies. When you get a small budget like that, everybody involved tends to do quite a lot of things on the movie. It's just who happens to be around at the time and what sort of job we can find to put them in. So the interesting thing about this is the Tomatoes saga, and there is a saga that I will talk about, is the only thing on his IMDb. Now, he's not as associated sort of with this film. I think probably more brainchild was behind this was John DeBello. Now, he gets credited as the producer, the director, the writer, the editor, and the music, because he did the theme song, and miscellaneous bit parts throughout the thing. So again, we got somebody who you do a lot of stuff when you're doing something like this. It's like, who's available and what can we do? Again, the Tomato Saga is his entire IMDb. However, it does include, and this is part of the legacy, it does include his producing Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, the animated series, which ran in the 1990s. He is also a guest at conventions and other places. Helicopter cost him a lot of money. Oh, am I going to talk about that helicopter? That is really an interesting bit. Other guy on this, Stephen Pierce. He is billed as the producer and the writer, and he also plays Lieutenant Wilbur Finletter, who is that Army lieutenant who's constantly carrying around dragging his parachute behind him. Interesting thing about this, one of the interesting things, is the phone number involved here, right? In the opening credits, this phone number comes up. Now, of course, I called it. It rings through to a busy signal. Now, the interesting thing about this number is it's not a number you would usually use for this sort of thing. And no one will ever be able to be assigned this number, ever, because they're going to get through to, if somebody was assigned this, half the people watching this are going to call that number, maybe more. So they'll never be able to assign this number. This is why most film, TV, video games, etc., you'll have an area code, and then the first three numbers are 555. Now, that technically is a phone exchange sent to a telephone company, a central office. The last time I ever tried to call something was 555-1212. And at one time, that was directory assistance. That was, you could call them and get a phone number from them. We don't have that much anymore. But again, this is usually used for fictitious numbers in the United States and North America, video games, TV shows, etc. And it's to stop people like me doing what I did, which is to call this thing and bothering a real person who's living there. So usually you'll see a 555 number. Up here, they just were doing it. They didn't use a 555. And now no one can ever use this number ever again. Yes, the drummer of Pearl Jam. I'm going to talk about that. Yeah, he performed "Puberty Love," went on to do like Larry says, Soundgarden, and now Pearl Jam. He's the drummer for it. Pardon me, I'm getting over a bit of a sinus infection, so I have things draining. So, known actors, the ones who really were known. Again, the cast was made up mostly of unknowns who were probably friends of the producers and the director, except for, as Larry says, Jack Riley, who played one of the characters, Bob's recurring characters on the Bob Newhart show. I think he's in one scene. It's a small role. There's another one where there's a child who is attacked by the tomatoes. It is, in fact, Dana Ashbrook, who worked on Twin Peaks. Now, that helicopter scene, oh my God, the helicopter scene. Okay. This was a real helicopter crash. It was in a scene towards the beginning when law enforcement officers are trying to stop the tomatoes with weapons and stuff, and they got themselves a $60,000 Hiller aircraft UH-12E that had been rented for this thing. Now, it was supposed to land in the tomato patch over by where you see it in the film. It's supposed to land right there. But during that landing, as you can see, the tail rotor hit the ground, and it spun out of control, rolled over, and burst into flames. That was not supposed to happen. But they had about 4 cameras on it, and so they said, well, hell, we'll just work it into the film. So they ad-libbed some stuff, moved it, and worked the whole crash into the film. There's a whole ad-lib line, I'm sure, where the guy's saying where the press secretary of the United States is getting out and walking away from it, and he's saying, and the other guys are saying, "What about the pilot? What about the pilot?" And he says, "I don't care about the pilot." So, and Larry says, all the crew were non-union. Oh yeah, this was just one of those movies made by some people who thought it'd be funny to make a B movie. But that crash, as I say, I got a kick out of that when I found out about it. That crash was totally unintentional. If you watch closely, the people who are actually like the cops in the foreground, right, who are when the thing crashes, or anybody who's in the foreground of the camera, when they're reacting to that thing crashing, those are real reactions. I think the close-ups and stuff they got were pickup shots they did later. But, you know, when the thing is crashing, anybody who's actually in the frame is watching a real helicopter crash, you know, so... There is music on this. Oh my God, there's actually music on this piece of crap. There was a soundtrack released on this. Really, I'm not kidding. There was a soundtrack released, and the tracks include the theme from Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, which is kind of catchy, and it is a parody of the theme from The Blob, the movie The Blob. Larry, there's a special appearance by the Royal Shakespearean Tomatoes by arrangement with the Queen. Yes, yeah. Yeah, it's all intentionally goofy. The band that plays on it is the same name as the production company. But again, you have the theme from Killer Tomatoes, which is, like I say, it's a parody of the theme from The Blob, which I've reviewed. You get the Mind Maker song, the Tomato Stomp, Puberty Loves, which I gather couldn't find this thing, but I gather it's incomplete. If you want to listen to most of it, you can hear it during the turning point of the battle, and somebody has already pulled that out as a clip that I have a link to below. Then you have a love theme and the end credits. That was what was on the stupid soundtrack. So, Puberty Love was written by John DeBello, and again, it was sung by, as Larry mentioned, Matt Cameron, who later went on to become the drummer for Soundgarden, and then with Pearl Jam. He's been with them since 1998. So the rest of the music was composed by Gordon Goodwin. Interestingly enough, he later wrote a big band piece for the music of this film to be played with his jazz ensemble, Gordon Goodwin's A Big Fat Band with a PH. And he did get Emmy nominations for other work that he did. Reception on this thing, this is not going to be a hideously long review. The reception on this, well, as Larry says, low budget. This was a $100,000 film at the time. If you translated that into 2018 dollars, that'd be about $400,000. Not a big budget movie at all, and intentionally so. The profit on it at the box office was $567,000. If you translate that into 2018, that's about $2.2 million. So it actually made some decent money. I mean, if you had us today, say today, a $400,000 budget, you make $2.2 million. Damn, you know, it did make some decent money at the box office. Now the critics, you go over to Rotten Tomatoes, they have it at 27%. Now I'm a little surprised it's that low because, you know, if you're trying to take it seriously as a film, sure, it's terrible, but you know, it's supposed to be bad. So why is it so low? I think it's, you know, bad. Yeah, helicopter crash cost them over half the budget. Yes, it did. $60K out of their 100. So the crash, while really great on film, totally unexpected, and you know, cost them a lot of money, like you say. So I'm a little surprised that the critics have this so low. It was generally very panned by the critics of the time. In fact, Variety said, quote, "It isn't even worthy of sarcasm." I don't think that's true, and reviewers have warmed to it over the decades. But again, when they first did it, it got terrible reviews, I think because they were like trying to take this stupid thing seriously or something. So, Rotten Tomatoes for the viewers, however, has it about 42%. And I'm a little surprised that it's that low as well. Because everybody knows this is a low-budget piece of crap. It knows it's silly. But interestingly enough, you know, over the years it has turned into a bit of a cult classic. And it does, I'm not sure, but somehow it became a cult classic. And it does have a lot of later influences, as a matter of fact. So there were sequels. As I say, there is a Killer Tomatoes saga. Return of the Killer Tomatoes in 1988, which picks up 10 years later, not surprisingly. The most interesting thing probably about that film, I haven't seen it all the way through, is the casting of George Clooney in one of his first film roles. The next two, because again, it's a saga so far. Killer Tomatoes Strike Back in 1990, and then in 1991, Killer Tomatoes Eat France. So there were some sequels. And there's more to it. There's more to the Killer Tomatoes than you would think. When we get into things like adaptations, parodies, spin-offs, and rip-offs, well, in 1986, there was a video game based on this film. It was released for 8-bit computers. It was 1986, so... In 1990, there was an Attack of the Killer Tomatoes TV series, which is not really based on Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. It's more based on Return of the Killer Tomatoes, but there's a TV series in 1990 that ran for a while. 1996, Tim Burton completely ripped off this ending from Mars Attacks. And in that one, the Martians' heads explode when you play Slim Whitman's song Indian Love Call. But he ripped off the ending from this, just totally ripped it off. 1997, there was another video game, this time based on the animated series, which was released for the NES and for the Game Boy. Then, in 1991, there's a novel, Attack of the Killer Potatoes, which is obviously paying tribute to this film. 1999, there was a Greek film that was made as an homage. The English title for that is The Attack of the Giant Moussaka. I didn't know what that was. I had to look it up. It is apparently an eggplant or potato-based dish. So, then in 2004, author Kim Harrison started writing a series of novels which are based on the notion, it's her The Hollows series, and it's based on the notion that there are genetically engineered tomatoes who have killed off a significant portion of the human race. And she says outright, yeah, the inspiration came from the movie. What a shock. I mean, the tomatoes attack and kill people. In 2008, Viper Comics released a comic book adaptation of the film. And in 2018, there was an Attack of these Killer Tomatoes, a special collector's edition Blu-ray released. Now, I tried to get my hands on this because I noticed it has a lot of features. I couldn't. But some of the features that might be really interesting to listen to is there is an audio commentary with director John DeBello. They have the 8mm test footage that they did with this. There is a bit called Legacy of a Legend, talking about some of the stuff that I talk about here. Crash and Burn, which talks about that helicopter crash. Deleted scenes, yes, believe it or not. They did, in fact, edit this thing. There are deleted scenes. And there's a bunch of other stuff. Based on what I was seeing there, I definitely recommend getting that Blu-ray. I would put a link to it in my description, but I find when I do that with too many off-site links, it can get me a community guidelines strike here on YouTube, so I'm not going to do that. But go to Amazon, search for Attack of the Killer Tomatoes and a Blu-ray, and you'll see it instantly. It looks like it would be a good thing to have. Then there's development hell, because in 2008, they announced a remake that was supposed to be Kent Nichols and Douglas Sarme, who are the creators of Ask a Ninja. We're going to develop the project with Nichols being the director. And M. Dowell Walton III was co-producing along with Emmett/Furla Films. And that went nowhere. In 2011, John DeBello said that the Ask a Ninja creators were no longer involved. Then 7 years later, this year in 2008, Steve Peace, remember he was one of the producers and played that lieutenant. He and Costa Dillon, the director, announced that there was going to be a new sequel, and they did it at the San Diego Comic Book Convention. Dustin Ferguson is rumored to be the director. Now, the interesting thing is, if you go to the Killer Tomatoes website, and I think I've got a link for that below, it has an RSVP for auditions. So you could audition for this thing if you wanted to. Now, no purchase is necessary. Participants, it said, will be selected by October 31st, 2018, subject to the movie production timeline. It is still up with no notice about auditions having been completed, which I think is probably a good indication that this film is still in development hell. They also mentioned that if you do want to audition for it, entry does not guarantee selection. Participants will not be compensated for travel or other expenses, and the location for shooting will be San Diego, California. So if you want to go over there and sign up to try to audition for this sequel, feel free. So, Killer Tomatoes also has a Twitter account at AK Tomatoes. It has been dormant since August 30th of this year, which again tells me that this thing's probably stuck in development hell. There's also a YouTube channel. I've linked to it below. Hasn't been an upload there in 5 years. Again, indication that this thing is probably in development hell. Half an hour. Half a freaking hour. San Diego was its base location. Yeah, that's where they shot the first one, and I'm sure these guys live there. I'm sure they live there. So, half a freaking hour. That's how long this review was, because it's just supposed to be silly. And there's so much humor, aside from what you can see in it, you know, the obvious stuff. The lieutenant who's dragging around his parachute behind him, the undersea expert who is always wearing his scuba gear, the singer from Russia or something that they've got, who's, you know, a parody of how it's not so much something you see now, but it was a big deal back at the time. Sometimes when you went to the Olympics, you would see the Russian women looking a lot bigger. I think probably the Soviets were using steroids on them and stuff, but they would generally come in a lot bigger than women from other countries. So there was that. So, I mean, there's that stuff that can be parodied. There's the parody like at the beginning when they go into that little tiny meeting room that they're all shoved into. There's the Japanese guy who is clearly they're doing dubbing for his voice, and he uses thing. He uses thing. It was a racial slur at the time, but he mistakes a word, and then one of the generals says, "There's a little Jap in the air," and they say he means nip. You know, so there's stuff like that, but that's all obvious. So. I mean, there just isn't a hell of a lot to say about this film beyond that. It is, you know, is it any good? Yeah, it's a funny, stupid little film. It was shot on the cheap, and it looks like it. It's totally self-aware about the humor. You cannot think that they were doing this by accident. It was all just intentional. Larry says, showing a San Francisco shot of cable car and titling it in New York City. Yeah, I mean, that's all, like you say, it's all the obvious humor. You know, stuff like that comes up all the time. It's funny that way. It is satirizing B movies. It's got, you know, other stuff that is unfortunately lost to time. But I think there is enough of the satire that it still stands the test of time. And it has become a cult classic for some reason. I don't know why, but it has. And like all cult classics, you probably should have watched it at least once. You know, preferably in the company of your friends, science fiction fans, or people just like schlock movies. Watching it just by yourself isn't necessarily that much fun of an experience, but when you see it with other people, you can laugh at it, and it's kind of a kick. And Larry says, scrolling ad across the screen. Yeah, there was that scrolling ad along the bottom. Same phone number, but I don't remember if the phone number was in it. But, yeah, scrolling ad, and then it stops because they're getting attacked by tomatoes. And, yeah, there's all sorts of stuff like that here. I could walk through and point out all the humor and try to set the stage and a lot of the cultural stuff. But it's really, why retell the jokes? If you have to explain it, it's not funny. But there's a lot of stuff like that in it. There's a lot of bits of humor and, like the advertising agency, that's something that definitely doesn't date. You could still see that today conceivably. As I say, the acting is pretty terrible all the way around, with the exception of the press secretary. He's reasonably good. The rest of them generally all terrible, and it's on purpose. The robot. I mean, giant tomato in my background, all that stuff. Superman makes a brief appearance in this film because one of the reporters is named Lois, and so Clark Kent walks past with his cake sticking out of the back of his jacket. Lois is a terrible reporter. She never seems to get any of the facts ever, and that's intentional. the guy that she's, the head guy when she falls in love with him at the end, and that silly love song that they do that's all dubbed and stuff like that, and the acting is terrible. Again, all of this stuff was intentional, self-aware. Yep, tomatoes in the water, a.k.a. Jaws. Yep, exactly. They were satirizing Jaws. There's all kinds of satire in here, and it still works. I think it still works. It's a funny little movie to watch. Again, probably watched better with friends than if you're doing it by yourself. Excuse me, as I said, I'm getting over a sinus infection, so I've had it about a week now. Doctor I'm going to is the doctor I saw before in Des Moines forever. She just didn't give me any freaking antibiotics. So anyway, as Larry says, there's lots of fun humor in this. It is goofy. It is bad acting. It's bad everything, but it's on purpose. It is, satirizing B movies. No Star Wars references. Yeah, oddly enough, no Star Wars references. You'd think there'd be some. Well, yeah, you'd think so. I'm not sure when they shot the thing. It was in 1977, like you say. I think it was after Star Wars would have come out. I'm not sure. Forgotten Star Wars' release date, but I think it was the summer. It was the summer. I don't know when they were shooting it. Maybe they couldn't get it in. But hey, they got a crashed helicopter. And they got a fair number of, cars and stuff, and really bad. I mean, even if you go back to the 1950s, Ed Wood movies. When I do the review next year of Plan 9 from Outer Space, I'll talk about, the bad movie making that they had, and the fact that, like, among other things, they couldn't get any real police cars. So, they just use a black car at one point, and, they didn't have to do that. They got police cars, they got a tank, they had a helicopter that they were planning to land, and it didn't work. But there's lots of stuff like that, and they did spend some money on it. It's not complete, waste of time. They made a little better effort at it than Ed Wood did, even though they're sort of parodying Ed Wood or satirizing him. That's really the review. I can say, yeah, go and watch this thing. I think it's worth watching. Probably better watching with friends than it is by yourself. Maybe you can put it on in the background sometime when you're doing something else. But again, I think it's one of those movies that's best seen with friends. And that's how it kind of made its money, and how it became a cult classic. It was going around from college campus to college campus to college campus. It wasn't so much in the theaters. It was this college campus stuff. And so it became a cult classic because of that. Had 3 sequels, a TV series, and all that other stuff based on it. And that's totally because it's a cult classic. It has nothing else to really, recommend it for. It's just a cult classic. So, I'll talk again here about my New Year's Day live stream charity. As I've mentioned before, as a result of learning that one of my regular viewers has a brother who lost everything in the campfire because he lived in Paradise, California, on New Year's Day, I'm going to hold a 5-hour live stream charity that I'm going to raise money for the campfire survivors. Also doing some non-spoiler reviews of major stuff like The Orville and Doctor Who, which will be airing that same day. I'm going to do some other mini reviews. One of them that I'm going to do is a fan film called Vader Episode 1, Shards of the Past. I have a link to that below. I definitely suggest you watch it. I can tell you as a short review, that thing is really awesome. It's a really good fan film. It's getting a lot of attention now on YouTube, and rightfully so. I will also be doing something that I'm going to start as a regular feature. Going forward, and I'm going to do... Well, going forward, what I'm going to do is prepared 5-minute, pre-recorded videos, which is not what I usually do, that I'm going to upload. And they will give you snippets of how a Padawan can train to be a Fandi master. And it'll be somewhat funny, but also somewhat serious. And the first one, lesson 1, and maybe other lessons, depending on how time goes on my 5-hour live stream, I'm going to pull out, I'm going to have lesson 1 on the 5-hour live stream, and I'm going to pull it out as a clip, and then going forward, I'm going to do some of those maybe weekly, maybe a 5-minute thing, however much I can jam it down, which is going to be in part, some funny stuff, but also, I was thinking about it, and there are some specific things that you can do to become a Fandi master, so I'm going to try to do some of those. Other thing I'm going to do on there is I'm going to debunk the press. If you want to come to me with any story from the press, from any source, I will do as I've done a couple of times in another show. I will sit here and debunk it live. Don't tell me what it is. Just show up with it. If nobody does, I'll show up with my own, or take something randomly that I just happen to find. Don't tell me about it, because I will be able to show one of three things about whatever you throw at me: that it never happened, that it didn't happen as reported, or when you remove all of the propaganda and emotionally loaded language, the facts devolve to a few sentences at best. Because, as is the secondary motto of this show, nothing you see in the press is real. Nothing. And so I'm going to take some time to do that. And I'll have some other things that I'll be preparing for the next few days so that we can do that. Time for this sucker is different. It is not my usual time because I want to give you a chance to get over your hangover from the night before, maybe watch a little sports in the morning. And so I'll be starting this and trying to get it out the door by the midnight on Eastern Time Zone. I'll start it at 6 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Central, 4 p.m. Mountain, 3 p.m. Pacific, and if you're working off of UTC, that'll be 11 p.m. Now, I talk about this a fair amount in a video that I did pre-record and release called Fan Down, Fans to the Rescue. I have a link for that below. You might want to watch that. Just, throw it around to people, share it. It's basically kind of a trailer advertisement for the 5-hour live stream, but it goes into that thing about fanish history and how we've always kind of been there for each other. So throw that one around, let people see it, and maybe they can get some more people to show up. More eyes I have, the more money this charity will get, and the easier we'll be able to make some people's lives. It's only 40 minutes. I'm amazed. It's so little to talk about because it's just intentionally bad film. What do you say? Go through all the jokes? Go through and explain all the stuff that's dated? What do you do? Might be a good thing in as much as I'm now out of my usual water. So, sorry, man. Got this sinus infection I'm getting over. Okay, well, I might do a little bit of ad copy. This will be after my 5-hour live stream on New Year's Day. So, Friday, January 4th, on Tales from SYL Ranch. As the Orville heads to Markless for Bortus's special once-a-year ceremony, Ed discovers Kelly has been dating again. Gordon asks for John's help, and Claire turns to Isaac for parenting advice. That's Friday, January 4th on the Bandai Masters mini-review of the Orville Season 2, Episode 2, Jalola. Then, Monday, January 7th on Tales from SYL Ranch. One of the sons of Frankenstein finds his father's monster in a coma and revives him, only to discover that he is controlled by Igor, who is bent on revenge. That's January 7th on the Fandi Masters 80th anniversary review of Son of Frankenstein. January 1st Doctor Who review. If I said Doctor Who, I didn't mean to. That's the Orville, Season 2, Episode 2. January 1st, yes, Doctor Who. And I'll be doing both Doctor Who and, what am I trying to say? And the Orville, that will have aired the preceding Thursday. And then the Doctor Who New Year's Day special is going to be airing in the UK, such that I will have watched it by the time it shows up here. I don't know that everybody in the US will. Which is why I'm doing a non-spoiler review for both of those. I don't want to, have everybody come in and get spoiled for that. The only stuff I'm going to do spoilers on, if I do any at all, will be the fan films. There's going to be more than one. I have been meaning to talk about fan films and do some reviews of them for some time. But this will give me an opportunity to insert some of those there. But that Vader fan film, wow. Wow. Go watch it. I think these guys are going to have a GoFundMe for doing another part. It is the first part of an ongoing story, but I'm not sure they intended to do anything else unless they got money. So, yeah, do take a look at that. It's really good. I think you'll definitely enjoy it if you're watching this show. As always, Tales from SYL Ranch, when I'm doing Fridays and Mondays, will be live in North America at 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Central, 7 p.m. Mountain, 6 p.m. Pacific, and if you're working off of UTC, it's 2 a.m. Tuesday morning. After Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. Well, before that, actually, after today, well, got my live stream on New Year's Day. I'll push it again. 5-hour charity live stream to raise money for campfire survivors. And I do have a specific charity chosen now. It is the Paradise Police Relief Fund. That's not going to the police. That's going to people who were in paradise. So that's the one I'm going to be pushing out there. It's not a GoFundMe or anything that I started up myself. There's one already out there for it, and I'm just going to say, hey, donate to that sucker. They're aiming for, I've forgotten, $100,000. I think they had last time I looked about $47,000. Maybe we can make that go up a little bit. Vader Film isn't a link. Oh, isn't it? I'll change it then. I'm sorry about that. Search for, let me find the name of it. Sorry, I'm so far back. It's called Vader Episode 1, Shards of the Past. If you search for that, you will find it. It isn't a clickable link? Okay, I'll make sure it gets clickable after I'm done here. I'll make sure that gets done. So again, I'm doing that New Year's Day thing. It'll be at 6 p.m. Central, 5 p.m. 6 p.m. Eastern, rather, 5 p.m. Central, 4 p.m. Mountain, 3 p.m. Pacific, and 11 p.m. UTC. After that, on January 4th, on Friday nights, I will be doing a mini review of the preceding night's episode of The Orville. I do dislike having to do that on Friday. If there's any way I can figure out a way to do it on Thursday, I will, because 2 reasons. One is you get more views if you get your reviews out early. And the other is I don't like doing on Fridays because theoretically anyway, my audience could be out doing things on Fridays, dates and stuff. Be there or be square on the New Year's Day live stream. Yes, abso-frackin-lutely. So I'll see how it goes. If I can figure out a way to do that Thursday, I will. Otherwise, it's going to be Friday at my regular time, 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Central, 7 p.m. Mountain, 6 p.m. Pacific, and 2 a.m. the next day. So, again, January 7th, I've got my review of The Son of Frankenstein. On January 14th, I will be doing a centennial, that is a 100th anniversary review of the film The Mistress of Mars. January 21st will be a retro review of King Kong from 1933. And because I went and gushed about it, go back and watch my review of Superman the movie. Because I gushed at that thing like crazy, I decided that on January 28th, I'm going to do a retro review of the film, not the TV series, the film Supergirl, which came in 1984. It's usually outside of my time period, but I figured, hey, I'm going to be doing, I did Superman and I loved that. Why not we do a little bit of schlock? I've mentioned before, I have a weird attachment to this film. I know it's terrible. I know it's bad in just about every respect. When I do the review, I will probably analyze why I still like this film a little bit. If it's just the fact that Helen Slater, who plays Supergirl, was very attractive at that time and close to my age, that may be the only reason I still like this. I don't know. But when I do the review, I'm going to try to self-analyze and see why it is that I actually like this very bad and stupid movie. In terms of February, I have everything scheduled out, I think, in the month of February. You can see it on my website, www.wrstone.com. You can also go there if you are wanting to support me. Ordinarily, I would say, of course, and I do that tonight, please subscribe, like the video, tell your friends, family, neighbors, pets, and livestock to do the same. And ordinarily, however, I would suggest that you donate to me. However, in this case, I would say no. Hold your money back and save it for these guys. This is Paradise, California, where the brother of one of my viewers is or came from. That's what they got left right there. So if you got any money, don't spend it on me. Save it and spend it on the people who really need it. Or if you happen to have just a crap ton of money. But either way, I would suggest, hanging on to it until the live stream on January 31st. There are obviously people who need this a hell of a lot more than I do. Where can we see Mistress of Mars? Yeah, I haven't quite figured that one out yet. I'm still looking for it. If you go to the website and there's a show schedule in the sidebar, if you click on that, the calendar, if you click on any given review, usually I will try to find a place where you can watch it on the internet for free. I haven't found one yet. I'm going to find one. It's just not on my radar just yet because it's a couple of weeks out. At the moment, I'm more working on how I'm going to fill 5 hours on January 1st. So, as I say, in this instance, contributions, why don't you wait on that and give them to the people who need it. I do always have to thank people who have funding me or supporting me. I do use the contributions. I have a Amazon wish list out there that if you want to buy anything off of it, please feel free. If you buy the laptop that's sitting out there, which, by the way, has gone down to about $1,100 if you get it remanufactured, and I don't care if you do. So it's down to about 11K. I'm sorry, 11K, 1,000, about 1,100-ish, down considerably from where it started, not surprisingly, because computers age rapidly. The difference here is that I don't need a brand fracking new one. So if you went and bought that thing outright, you get to be the program director of my show. You can tell me what to do, when to do it, what to review, and what times. But that would be nice to have. Fill 5 will be a piece of cake. Yeah, and, I don't think it's going to be that tough, actually, to fill 5 hours. And, I'm going to take lots of audience interaction if you want to ask me things that you don't ordinarily ask on a review, my opinions about, this, that, or the other thing. And, if it's political or things going on, I'll talk about that from a libertarian perspective, as I always do. If you do contribute financially, it does all go towards the laptop. Now, right now, there's only 2 ways to contribute, sadly. And I've talked about this before, it's why, but there's really only 2 ways to contribute. And one of those is my PayPal tip jar, which I do have a link for below. The other is an Amazon wish list, as I said. You can't get to the wish list here on YouTube because if I put too many off-site links, I can get a community guidelines strike. I got 3 times the last time for that. I think. They never told me, but I think after talking to other YouTubers that that's why I had it. So that'll all go towards the laptop, and that laptop will definitely make things better. And if you want to see how to contribute to that and see the wish list, you can go to my website. There is a contribute link on the sidebar, and it'll show you a link to that wish list as well as a couple of things I'd like off of it. One of which is not nearly as expensive. I think it's about $75 now. And that is a Tilly hat, a brown hemp Tilly hat that I'm going to need at some point to replace the one that I've got here. This was never intended to be used very much, I don't think. And I don't use it much except for the show, but I'm going to have to replace it at some point. And also having that Tilly hat, I've been trying to get in touch with Tilly Endurables, who makes it, because I am a real believer in their products. This is not a paid endorsement. I would love to have a paid endorsement for them, which is why I'd kind of like to have that hat. But they make some really good stuff. I mean, if you've seen my videos now down, I'm going to put them up someplace, of live streaming from out of my family's ranch land, you've seen the hat. The thing actually does have a lifelong guarantee. I've used it once because I had that. I've had a hat just like that for 25 or so years. And it finally did wear out in the front from sweat and stuff. Sent it to them. They sent me a new one. And I had the option of leaving that old one with them or them sending it back with. I told them, no, keep it because it's been all over the place, and it had been all over North America. I said, no, keep it, put it in your museum, and I think that's what they actually did. But it really does have a lifetime guarantee. If it wears out in any way, they will give you a new one for free. And that's the way it is with all of their hats and stuff, so it's very nice. Linda Carter as the president of the, yeah, that's exactly right. Yep, Helen Slater has been in the TV. Supergirl, yeah, she's I've forgotten her name. It's Danvers, because I took that from the comics. But yeah, and Dean Cain as her parents, yeah, her adopted parents on Earth. And Linda Carter as the president of the United States, yeah. And I understand that Terry Hatcher was on for a couple of episodes. I haven't seen them all. I kind of fell behind, which is too bad because I did like the show. Except that it's made for a younger crowd, and I get that. I totally get it. It felt, when I was watching it, it felt a lot like Charmed. TV series Charmed. Oh, how politically incorrect can I get? I liked Charmed because of the 3 women that were in it. That's the only reason I liked it. But they had a lot of soap opera drama on there that would occur in between decent action. So that's kind of how Supergirl is. It's not for me. It's not aimed at me. I get that. It's aimed at people who are in their 20s and have that sort of love drama going on from time to time. So it's made for them. I get it. But it is certainly a really good show. Yeah, young'uns, as Larry says, yeah. But Supergirl is a really good show. Any of the stuff that the DC people are doing on TV are really good shows. Definitely watch those guys. With Supergirl and some of the others, I kind of, frankly, skip over the love drama and other drama parts because it doesn't move me particularly. Again, not aimed at me. So I get that. I get it. As I say, go over to my website, check out my wish list, pick up something on it if you want to. There's lots of stuff there that isn't that expensive. But laptop would be nice. Not that I expect anybody to buy it for me. Well, I've come up on an hour here. That's something, I guess. I killed 20 minutes pushing my live stream that I'm going to be doing on New Year's Day. So again, do please come in for that live stream. Try to help out people. The charity that we've got going, the Paradise Police Relief, that's a good charity. They need the money, obviously need the money, and it was one that would, in fact, directly help the brother of my regular viewer. Yeah, almost an hour. Well, again, what do you say about this film? It's just a fun little piece of trash. Again, that's totally intentional, totally self-aware, and turned into a cult classic against all odds. It's kind of like a lot of cult classics. You say to yourself, why? Why did this thing become a cult classic? But it has. It has. It took a big seat on college campuses, 1970s, 80s. Had its animated series and 3 sequels. So, will the money go to one charity? Yeah, it's going to go to the, again, I've forgotten the name now off the top of my head. I found it in the last 2 days because I was looking for something specific to Paradise. But the Paradise Police have a relief fund, and I'm going to be pushing that one on the show. And so last I looked, their GoFundMe was like up to 47,000, I think, and they're aiming for 100,000. But I did that one because I was specifically looking for something that would be Paradise, California related, because that's more likely to hit the brother of the viewer that I've got. So yes, it's all going to go to that single charity. I'm not even setting up a GoFundMe myself. It's going to be straight to that charity. So, well, aside from pushing my live stream, that would be all the time we have today, boys and girls. Real short one. So tune in, please, on New Year's Day for the Fandi Masters charity 5-hour live stream that will raise money for the campfire survivors. Yeah, Paradise Fire Relief Fund. I just don't remember, but it's one of those. Yeah, it's a GoFundMe for Paradise, and I'm not going to push my own. I want you guys to see where it's going. So until my 5-hour charity, this is Tales from SYL Ranch, the vlogcast that reminds you to always know where your towel is. And I'm your host, Bill Stone.
Ultimate power in this world has always been one simple thing: the control and manipulation of minds.